Could I have some new batteries? It says low battery. All right. It's better that we had that there at that point rather than right in the middle. So I'm just curious, just to get us started this morning, who here has shared your story with someone lately? And I mean by like stories, either a story from your life, maybe even a story of your testimony, or even a story about Jesus. Has anybody shared any of those stories recently? Okay. Some others? Yeah? How did it go? Does anybody feel willing to give us some feedback on how that went? Fine. Yeah? Okay. Any care to elaborate a little?
I just was telling my cancer journey with someone.
Oh, yeah.
What's today, Sunday?
Yeah.
Yesterday.
Oh, okay. Good. Kim, I saw you raise your hand too. How did it go? How was it received?
Not so much that I shared, but the pastor at my father-in-law's funeral,
Mm.
he shared the gospel.
Yeah.
And there was feedback after about it. It was a little bit on the negative side. No one came to me.
Right.
And all I can say was this was my testimony was that all I can say is the Bible tells us that the gospel is offensive to those who are perishing.
Yeah.
And we should expect that from everyone.
Yeah.
But we can pray for the seeds that are planted,
Mm-hmm.
be nourished by the Lord, and fruit to be borne.
Right. Yeah.
I have a friend that's not a Christian,
Yeah.
and he was telling me yesterday that I recorded some songs, some gospel songs on YouTube, and he said he was listening to one of them, and he played it for me twice.
Mm.
I listened to it, and it's about being baptized with by the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually my brother.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful that that song
Yeah.
so it will open the door to more conversations, I'm sure,
Yeah.
as it started. So I prayed for him that he would come to know the Lord, be patient,
Yeah.
and he would bless us all.
Yeah. Yeah. Stories. Rick, what were you going to say?
I picked up a hitchhiker.
Yeah.
That's a great opportunity, really. Because first you got to practice, you got to and then they feel obligated to listen to what you got to say, I think. And so I shared my experiences with him,
Yeah.
just a young fellow.
Yeah.
He said, yeah, I respect that.
Mm.
I will pursue it further.
Yeah.
This was good.
Good. This morning, we are going to be working on, we've been talking some about bless for the last few weeks. These are missional practices, things that we can do to help us stay involved, to stay close to our community, our neighbors, our friends in mission. And I was thinking about this, like, just to review this, because we've been actually with interruptions and stuff, we've been working at this for a while, but this is an acronym, BLESS, and the B is to begin with prayer, where we should begin with everything, is praying for people. And I can't tell you how many times it has helped me to have in my journal a card with the people that I am praying for and to pray for them. And as I've listened to them, that's the second L, to begin praying for the things that are difficult for them, things that they're going through in their lives, and so how these things help us. So begin with prayer. Then the L is listen with care. And I can just tell you, even just, it was Wednesday, where I met with a friend who's becoming a friend of mine, who I intentionally was pursuing as a friend because of Bless, praying for him, and just getting to know each other over the last few months. And sometimes you think like, oh, I might have to wait for months or sometimes years before you have that situation where they're like, man, I'm really struggling. And so I had that opportunity to share a meal with him, which is the third, which is the E, eat together. Share a meal with him. I've been praying for him, listening to his story. And you can just tell, like, he came in and I said, wow, how have you been? I didn't, hopefully it wasn't offensive, but you could tell he was weighty. He was feeling worn out. and to talk with him. Like when he left, you could see he was different. Just having someone who genuinely cared for him and was listening, what a gift that is. And our society, we might take it for granted because we have each other or maybe good relationships, but there are so many people who go throughout life carrying difficult, damaging, hard things, and no one ever listens to them unless they pay for a counselor, which is different. Sometimes people can discount that because they think, well, this is something I'm paying them. Of course they're going to listen to me. So these practices are beginning with prayer, listening with care, eating meals together. I'm not going to preach all the sermons again, but how important it is to eat meals, just how that forms connections with people and fosters relationships, just sharing a meal together. We talked a couple weeks ago about serving in love and how this is often tangible. These are often tangible ways that people, when we listen to them, when we pray for them, when we eat meals for them, they'll say, oh yeah, I've got this project that I'm working on and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to tackle it. And then we can say, hey, I can help you with that. How that actually begins to put hands and feet, how it begins to put in motion or incarnate Jesus for them, to put flesh and bones, to show up for them, representing Jesus. And so this morning, we are on to the final S, if you ever thought we were going to get here, to share our story, or share your story. I need to say that I am impressed as I have studied BLESS. BLESS, this whole acronym, this approach to mission actually comes from Dave Ferguson, who was a pastor in Chicago, and he wrote this, and he was talking something about it, and at first I was thinking, like, this is a great way to stay connected, to be more involved, more intentional in mission. And to be honest, at first I was sort of thinking out of it, like, these are just some handy tips and tricks, some things that we can do that will help us to stay connected, to even share this good news about Jesus with our friends and neighbors. But the more I've studied them, the more deeply I've gone in them, and thinking about them theologically, about praying, about listening, about eating, about serving, and about sharing stories, the more I realize that while these are effective practices, it's true, they will help us act more like Jesus and minister and bless people in our community. It's true they will do that. They are also deeply theological and meaningful as parts of our faith. These are just as formative in us as they are helpful as a missional practice. Let me say that again. These practices are just as deeply formative of us, helping us actually live like Jesus and become more like Jesus. They are just as formative in us as they are helpful in helping us bless our neighbors. So this is good stuff. So the Spirit has brought a couple different strands together for me as I've been thinking about sharing our stories. Over the last 200 years, our society has had a particularly scientific emphasis on our approach to life. The last 200 years, it started to grow, and it has grown even more. And some of the things that have come out of that are things like materialism. And we often think of materialism as, just focus on stuff. We want more and more stuff. That's how we often use the word materialism. But it also has another meaning that the only thing we value or the only thing that we count is the material world. Things that we can measure, things that we can touch and observe, things we can put in categories and boxes. Well, you can see how much of real life that leaves out if your only focus is on the material. The other is individualism. The focus on ourselves rather than the corporate good, where we feel I am the highest order. I am the highest authority in life, or my life especially, and the influence of others is limited compared to ourselves. So individualism is one. Another is skepticism of the transcendent, which is some big words, but basically means it's just like you are skeptical about anything that's supernatural, anything that has to do with God, anything that has to do with miracles. The scientific approach to our culture over the last 200 years continually tells us if you can't explain it with scientific process, if you can't measure it in a beaker, then how can you really talk about it and how real can it really be? Well, that is a very narrow view of reality. We've given priority, our world around us has given priority to what we can prove and what we can explain. Anything that is supernatural or inexplicable is just discounted. Maybe that's okay for you, but because we can't repeat it on demand and because we can't measure it, it's just not important. We just can't say anything about it. So who cares anyways? The thing is, stories break through all of that. Stories, sharing our story, breaks through that. It tells what happens regardless of what people value. This is a phenomenological view. We just tell what happened. We just talk about the phenomenon. We talk about our experience. People can adjust their worldview to accommodate what happened or refuse to change their worldview to make alternate explanations. And so, Kim, I was just thinking about that as you're sharing your story about the pastor who preached. Some people will hear things, maybe his experience of how God had been at work in his life, and some people will say, wow, I really need to rethink that. I really need to think who Jesus is. Other people will just discount it and say, you know what, I really don't want to change how I live or change what I think, and so that's just that pastor's way. Good for him, not for me. Listen to this story from John's gospel. This is the story of the man born blind. Listen for some parallels between the Pharisees and skeptics of our day. Now, the Pharisees are skeptical for different reasons. I want to make that clear. They don't have the same ideological assumptions, the same ideological convictions that we do.